Welcome, welcome. This is Donna back for another exciting episode of You Were Designed for Greatness. We have a special guest today, and all of my guests are special, but each one of them are so unique and wonderful that I say that every time, and I really, really mean it. Now, I have a guest, Sheila VanZile, with me today, who we apparently have mutual connections and have connected on this podcast because I want to share her story and what she has happened in her life and what new and exciting things are doing. Say hello to everyone, Sheila, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, hello, Donna, and thank you. And thank you to everyone who's listening here today and in the future. I have lived in Grand Rapids since 1999. I came here with my son to continue my insurance career. I was an insurance executive for the majority of my career. And then I started my own business a few years after with an insurance agency and have had that for the last 16 years. So I've had a corporate life, since my early 20s, and have really been doing what those of us that are in our, late 50s, 60s, and 70s did, which was managed a home, managed a career, did all of that for, decades and decades and decades. And as a result of that, it kind of came to terms in the last few years with the idea that I'd been doing a whole lot of shoulds and not a whole lot of wants.
Yeah, I love that statement. As I often say to my clients and myself, it's like, whenever you say I have to, or I should, why? It's like, is that something you really need to do? So I heard you wrote a book. Tell me about it and how did that happen?
I did. And again, thank you. The book is called My Waterfall of Awakening: How Loss Can Bring You Home to the Life You Want. And the words were chosen pretty carefully, although it's a rather long title, but there was a lot to get in there from a messaging perspective. And if anyone had told me 4 years ago that I had a book in me, I'd have said, no, that's, and I'm not a writer. I'm not that kind of thing. But my mother died 4.5 years ago. And my mother's and my relationship was really quite difficult. She was very disapproving. She was very judgmental. She was very withholding of love. And as a result of that, with her death, I felt more of a guilty relief rather than, grief. And I also realized I had been given a lot of time back because I had been caring for her she died in my living room after 6 weeks of being there. So once the exhaustion kind of left me, I decided to use those hours and hours that I was not going to be caring for her for myself in some way that would be more focused on what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be. And in that first year, I took a retreat out to Oregon coast. I was born out in Oregon. I took a long retreat out there just to do some soul searching. And I began to realize that this idea of wants versus shoulds. So I continued down that path. I bought a house in France. That's another whole story. And I sold my business. And all of these things started to happen and paths started to open up along the way. And then a couple of people started to say, hey, there's a book. I'm like, no, there's not a book. Yeah, there's a book. No, there's not a book. So I met someone who was a writing coach who said, there's a book. So last August, I started writing, and by December it was complete. And what it's turned into is a guided journal. So it does tell my story relatively briefly, but the majority of the book is 38 lessons that really are geared to helping women undertake that own journey of awakening, undertaking their own journey of moving out of those shoulds and peeling those layers of unintended decisions away, and finding that young person that had all these aspirations that just kept getting shoveled down lower and lower and all of that. So that's where it came from. Long answer to a short question.
That was a great answer, and it helps us to understand what prompted you to write a book. I totally understand that people kept telling me, you have books in you, and I'm like, I'm not that great at English. My proofreading is awful. And it's like all of those are excuses that we do to be able to do that. So tell us a little bit more about your journey of awakening. What are some of the things that you learned?
Great question. I started with a process of understanding that a lot of the relationships in my life had become toxic, and that I was drawing people to me that in fact were not nurturing my soul. That I really needed to look at and reshape the people that were around me and how that, what that looked like. So there's an exercise actually in the book about how to go through that process and look at people as to, are they nurturing my soul? Are they neutral to my soul? Or are they sucking the life out of me? Right. And then how do you do that? And then as you start to make those assessments and keep yourself open, new people start to come into your life. So that was one of the things that I thought was a really important discovery.
Yes. Did you, with a mom who was disapproving, I think is the word you used, how did that affect you and how has that changed?
Yeah, that was another thing I began to understand, is that all of that generational self-loathing that had come from my mother, my grandmother, probably her mother, had been gifted to me. And so that particular piece of it, understanding where that had come from, and understanding also that being committed to loving myself first and finding a way to love myself first was an undertaking that was very challenging, because you're so stuck in that negative emotion and validating that overall. So I actually, quite frankly, I wrote vows to myself. I wrote a commitment to myself about my love to myself, and I encourage other women to do a similar thing, because unless you cherish yourself first, you really can't cherish the world. And that's really what's motivated me, is this idea that so many other women are in this space.
Yeah. With disapproving relationships, there's usually an idea that we need to be perfect, that we need to perform, and there's this constant, it's never enough. I'm sure you relate to that phrase. It's like,
absolutely
doesn't matter, it's never enough. And then as we don't believe in ourselves, then we have those kind of relationships. One of my coaches said to me, Donna, what if the world was treating you the way you thought about yourself? Which I believe is true. But it was like, oh my goodness.
Exactly.
Like one of those moments where the truth really hits you upside the head. And it's like, wow. So if I'm feeling like people are disrespecting me, I'm not respecting myself. If I feel like I'm not heard, am I listening to my soul and my spirit? Am I listening to what my longings and desires, so that I can really be, instead of doing everybody else's shoulds, and am I doing really what I want with my life? And I love your book, because why do we wait till we're 50?
Yeah.
I'm like, let's help women while we're doing all the things that we need to do as wives and moms, but learn to begin to embrace the wants, and that they're okay to give ourselves permission to want, to give ourselves permission to desire, and that it can work out for our good in all of that, while we're doing all the things that we do when we're younger mothers and wives, and all of the different stages of our life.
And also to give ourselves permission to realize that's not selfish.
Exactly.
I mean, we've been told that
absolutely
putting ourselves first, instead of understanding that by putting ourselves first, we have so much more to give. Yes. And we give from our hearts.
Yes.
And opening our hearts. I mean, think about that, is also such a challenge. I hear that feedback a lot, that we are so much in our heads because there's so much we should be doing that we really aren't coming from a heart-centered place. And it makes such a huge difference.
Absolutely. So if people wanted to get your book, where would they find it?
Well, it's hopefully being published in September. The original publication date was August. We were all on time for getting it all ready, but the paper availability on the planet is apparently a little challenging right now. So it's delaying a lot of the printers from that. So you can do a pre-sale sign up on the book at Sheila VanZile, which is SheilaVanZile.com. And there's also a blog there, so you can follow my blog if you'd like. So that gives you a little more information about the book. And then I have a Facebook page, Sheila VanZile Author. So those are the two places that are probably easiest to find me.
Wonderful. So we'll put that link in the show notes so that you'll be able to access that when you're listening to Sheila's story. So as we wind up, it always goes quicker than we think. As we wind up, any closing thoughts? Let's do this question first. What's the worst advice you ever got?
Take the next job, take the next promotion. Always take the next promotion. Yeah. Always want that next thing. Always do what you should do. And I'm speaking more corporately.
Yes.
But that this idea that as women, when we were younger, that we were the first in line for these real careers, and we didn't have any opportunity to say no. We had to just keep doing it and not taking any time. I think that's probably the worst advice that was ever given.
Yeah, it's doing, it's like, I can't be just content with where I am. It's
right.
Like, it's never enough. It's back to always that. So now some great advice. What closing thoughts would you like to share?
I think that, and I mentioned it a little earlier, and the message for me is pretty consistent, is that I think it's important for all of us to know we're not alone and that there's many of us on this similar journey. And don't be afraid to reach out, and don't be afraid to be open for what's ahead of you, because there is a way to find joy and be triumphant and write your own story. And it doesn't need to be daunting. You can sit back and breathe in your way into a lot of it by just doing like the simple thing you said, instead of I should do, saying, do I want to? And then making your decision from that place. So but not being alone is probably the most comforting message I've heard, coming out of this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Sheila, so much for sharing with our guest today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Donna.
What a lovely conversation with a woman who has written an amazing book to help you. So I hope you take advantage and check it out. And if I can be of any help to you on your journey, I would love to welcome you to a complimentary consultation with me. You can go to my website, ivibrantliving.com, click on schedule with me to be able to have a conversation with me and see what I can do to support you in your journey. Remember to like, review, and share this podcast so that we can be an inspiration to more women all around the world. So until next time, this is Donna saying live and love vibrantly.